As my father's face turned ashen, I handed him the eviction notice. "This is a joke, right, Olivia?" he stammered. The man who had once called me a worthless failure at my mother's funeral was now learning that I owned the $830,000 colonial house he had been living in, rent-free, for years. If you've ever been told you weren't good enough by someone who was supposed to be your biggest supporter, this story might resonate with you. I'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop your location in the comments below. My journey to stand up to family betrayal took years, and if it speaks to you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family karma finally being served. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Olivia Caldwell, and I'm 32 years old now, but my story really begins in the shadow of my father, Richard Caldwell. Growing up in our affluent Connecticut neighborhood, our family looked perfect from the outside. A beautiful home, a successful chief surgeon at Memorial Hospital, a caring mother, and 2 daughters, my older sister, Caroline, and me. But inside those pristine walls, my father wielded words like weapons, and I was his favorite target. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" he would say at the dinner table after I brought home a B+ on a test. Caroline never settled for less than perfect. Caroline, 3 years older than me, seemed to effortlessly excel at everything: academics, sports, making friends. She had our father's natural confidence and ambition. I was more like my mother, creative, empathetic, and sensitive. My father saw these qualities as weaknesses. "You're such a disappointment," Olivia became his refrain whenever I failed to meet his impossible standards. "All that potential, wasted." The words cut deeper than any physical punishment could have. By the time I was 12, I had internalized his message. I was worthless in his eyes. My mother, Martha, was the buffer between us. She would find me crying in my room after a particularly brutal verbal lashing from my father. "Your father just wants you to succeed," she would say, stroking my hair. "He doesn't know how to show love any other way." He grew up with his own father talking to him like that. Even as a child, I knew she was making excuses for him. I could see the pain in her eyes, the way she flinched sometimes when he raised his voice, but she stayed, and she tried to give me enough love to compensate for his coldness. The pattern continued through high school. I threw myself into art and writing, areas where Caroline had no interest, hoping to carve out my own identity. When I won a statewide essay contest, my father barely acknowledged it. "Writing won't pay the bills," he said dismissively. "You need to focus on practical skills if you want to be successful." I left for college at 18, choosing a school 3 states away. Those 4 years were transformative. I made friends who valued me, professors who recognized my talents, and I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the failure my father had always claimed. Then came the call during my senior year. Mom had stage 4 ovarian cancer. I moved back home after graduation to help care for her. At 24, I put my career plans on hold and watched my mother wither away. During those 8 months, my father was rarely home. The chief surgeon was too important, too busy saving other people's loved ones, to be present for his own wife. Caroline visited on weekends but maintained her busy life as a financial analyst in Boston. The bulk of Mom's care fell to me. I scheduled appointments, managed medications, held her hand through chemo sessions, and wiped her tears when the pain became unbearable. "You're the strongest person I know, Olivia," Mom told me one night when the morphine made her unusually candid. "Don't let anyone, especially your father, tell you otherwise." She died on a Tuesday morning in October. At the funeral, I was emotionally exhausted, having barely slept for weeks. During the reception at our house, I accidentally knocked over a vase of flowers, spilling water on the hardwood floor. My father exploded. "Can't you do anything right?" he shouted, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. "Your mother spent her last month stressed out because of your incompetence. You're a worthless failure, Olivia, always have been." The room fell silent. Relatives and friends stared at their shoes, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Carolyn stood beside our father, her hand on his arm, not to restrain him, but in solidarity. I looked at the faces around me, people who had watched this dynamic for years, and said nothing. In that moment, something inside me broke free. Without a word, I walked upstairs, packed a suitcase, and left. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back. My mother was gone, and with her, any reason to maintain the facade of family loyalty. With nowhere specific to go, I drove south until I reached Austin, Texas. Something about the city's energy called to me. It was creative, vibrant, and most importantly, as far from my Connecticut life as I could reasonably get. I rented a tiny studio apartment in East Austin with the last of my savings and took stock of my situation. I had no job, few connections, and a fresh wound where my family should have been. What I did have was my mother's inheritance, $50,000. She had left specifically to me in her will. Even that didn't come easily. My father contested it, claiming I had manipulated my mother in her weakened state. It took 3 months and a portion of that money in legal fees before the funds were released to me. "Don't waste it," was all the message I got from Caroline when the legal battle ended. I promised myself I wouldn't. During my first month in Austin, I met Sarah Jenkins at a coffee shop where I was using the free Wi-Fi to job hunt. She noticed the real estate listings on my screen and struck up a conversation. Sarah was in her 50s. A successful property investor who had built her wealth from nothing after escaping an abusive marriage in her 20s. "Real estate is the great equalizer," she told me over our second coffee meeting. "It doesn't care about your background or who your daddy is. It only cares about your hustle and your smarts. And honey, I can tell you've got both." Sarah became my mentor, teaching me the fundamentals of property investment. Under her guidance, I developed a strategy: use my inheritance as a down payment on a small, undervalued property, renovate it myself to save costs, rent it out, and then leverage the equity to purchase another. But $50,000 wasn't enough to start in Austin's booming market, so I worked hard. I took a day job as an administrative assistant at a real estate office, waited tables at night, and did freelance graphic design on weekends. I lived on ramen and coffee, saved every penny, and studied the market obsessively. 14 months after arriving in Austin, I made my first purchase, a rundown duplex in an up-and-coming neighborhood, for $220,000. I lived in one half while renovating the other, sleeping on an air mattress surrounded by paint cans and tools. When I finished the first unit, I rented it out and used the income to renovate my half. The process was exhausting. There were nights I collapsed in tears, wondering if my father had been right all along. Maybe I was setting myself up for failure. But each small victory, each problem solved with my own ingenuity, built my confidence. "The universe has a way of balancing accounts," Sarah would say, when I doubted myself. "Keep putting in the work. Your time will come." While building my business, I also began the harder work of rebuilding myself. I found a therapist who specialized in childhood, emotional abuse, and family trauma. Dr. Lewis helped me see the patterns that had shaped my self-perception, the ways I had internalized my father's cruel assessments. "You're not healing for them," she reminded me in our sessions. "You're healing for you." Slowly, I created a chosen family in Austin: Sarah, my neighbors Tyler and Mary Saul, my tenant-turned-friend Daphne, and eventually, Aiden, who started as my contractor and became my closest confidant. Over the next 8 years, I built my portfolio property by property. I developed a specialty in finding distressed homes, renovating them ethically, not just flipping for quick profit, either renting them long-term or selling them to first-time homebuyers at fair prices. By my 30th birthday, my initial $50,000 had grown into a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. I never posted about my success on social media. I never reached out to my father or Caroline. As far as they knew, I had disappeared into obscurity, proving Richard right about my worthlessness. Then came the chance encounter that would change everything. I was at an industry conference in Dallas when someone called my name. It was Michael Westfield, a childhood friend from Connecticut, whose parents had lived down the street from us. "Olivia Caldwell. I can't believe it's you," he exclaimed, giving me an awkward hug. "No one back home knows what happened to you. You just vanished." Over drinks that evening, Michael brought me up to speed on hometown gossip. He mentioned my father almost casually. "It's been rough for Dr. Caldwell the past couple years," he said. "That malpractice suit really did a number on him. Lost his position at Memorial, from what my mom says. Apparently, he's been hitting the bottle pretty hard, burning through whatever savings he had left." "Malpractice suit?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Michael nodded. "Operated on the wrong kidney or something like that. Patient died. Your dad always had a temper, but Mom says he's become the town's bitter old man. Still living in that big house though. It's falling apart around him." I lay awake that night in my hotel room, processing this information. My father, the great Dr. Richard Caldwell, had fallen from his pedestal. The man who had judged me so harshly was now being judged by the community he'd valued so much. I told myself I didn't care, that his problems were his own, just as he had made it clear my problems were mine alone. But something pulled at me, not sympathy, exactly, more like a loose thread I couldn't help but tug. Back in Austin, I found myself distracted by thoughts of my father. During a routine check of property listings in the Northeast Side, had been considering expanding my business. I did something I hadn't done in years. I searched for properties in my hometown. That's when I saw it. 45 Maple Avenue. My childhood home was in pre-foreclosure. My hands shook as I clicked through the listing. The colonial house where I'd grown up, 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, on a half-acre lot in one of Connecticut's most desirable neighborhoods, was estimated at $830,000. According to the listing, the owner had defaulted on mortgage payments for the past 6 months. I called an industry contact who owed me a favor and asked her to dig deeper. What she found confirmed Michael's story and more. My father had lost his medical license after the malpractice suit. Without his 6-figure income, he'd quickly fallen behind on the mortgage. The house would go to auction in 45 days. That night I poured a glass of wine and sat on my balcony overlooking downtown Austin. The ethical dilemma weighed on me. Did I have any obligation to help the man who had shown me so little compassion? Or was this the universe offering me a chance at poetic justice? Memories flooded back. Sharp, painful moments crystallized in time. My 10th birthday, when he'd called me ungrateful for being disappointed that he missed my party for a golf game. My high school graduation, when he'd criticized my valedictorian speech for being too emotional, not intellectual enough. The time I'd found my mother crying in the bathroom after he'd belittled her cooking in front of dinner guests. And most vividly, that moment at my mother's funeral, when he'd publicly confirmed what he'd always implied: I was worthless in his eyes. I called my attorney, Jessica Morales, the next morning. I want to create an LLC that can't be traced back to me, I explained. And I need to know what rights a property owner has regarding existing tenants in Connecticut. Jessica didn't ask questions, that's why I paid her the big bucks. Within a week, Sunrise Investments LLC was established with a complex ownership structure that obscured my connection. I transferred funds to a new account under the LLC's name and prepared to bid on my childhood home. Are you sure about this? Aiden asked me over dinner after I'd explained my plan. Revenge might feel good in the moment, but will it give you closure? This isn't just about revenge, I insisted, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. It's about reclaiming something that should have been part of my inheritance. That house was my mother's, too. She renovated it, maintained it, made it a home despite him. What I didn't say was that I wanted my father to feel what I had felt, powerless, at the mercy of someone else's judgment. Through my attorney, I learned something else. Caroline, my perfect sister with her perfect finance job and perfect life, had refused to help our father financially. According to the foreclosure documentation, Richard had transferred the property solely into his name after my mother's death, removing Caroline as a potential inheritor, one of his many short-sighted decisions. The auction came more quickly than I expected. I bid through a proxy, and after a brief bidding war with a local developer, Sunrise Investments LLC became the official owner of 45 Maple Avenue for $830,000. My father, I learned, had been informed by the bank that a private investor had purchased the property and was willing to let him stay on as a tenant, a courtesy not legally required. He had apparently been pathetically grateful, not questioning his good fortune too deeply. He had no idea that his landlord was his estranged daughter, the worthless failure who now held the keys to his future. My plan was calculated, but not cruel. I would gradually increase the financial pressure, nothing drastic, just enough to give him a taste of the anxiety he had so casually inflicted on others. I would watch from a distance as he struggled, as his pride crumbled, until the moment was right to reveal myself. This won't heal you, Aiden warned when I laid out my intentions. Using your power to hurt him, even if he deserves it, that's letting him change who you are. Maybe, I admitted. But I need to know if making him face consequences will finally free me from his voice in my head. I was about to discover that the truth about my family was even darker than I had imagined. I really appreciate you sticking with me through this part of my story. It's not easy to admit wanting revenge, but if you've ever been in a similar situation, you know that complex feeling. If this resonates with you, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone in these complicated family emotions. Now, Let's continue with what happened when I became my father's anonymous landlord. To maintain my distance, both emotional and physical, I hired Northeast Property Management to serve as the buffer between me and my father. As far as Richard knew, he was dealing with a faceless corporation that had purchased his home. All communications went through my property manager, Trevor, a known-sense professional who didn't ask questions about my unusual interest in this particular tenant. The tenant has agreed to the initial rental terms, Trevor reported after their first meeting, though he seemed surprised by the amount. Said something about expecting more consideration given his standing in the community. The rent I set was reasonable for the market. $3,200 per month for a house that size in that neighborhood, but for someone with no income and dwindling savings, it might as well have been $10,000. Through Trevor, I learned that my father had managed to make the first payment by selling his luxury watch collection. Each month, I received detailed reports, rent paid, barely on time, complaints about minor issues with the house, requests for repairs. I authorized only essential maintenance: the heating system before winter, a leaking roof in spring, the cosmetic issues: peeling paint, worn carpets, the cracked driveway deferred indefinitely. Through this arrangement, I gained a window into my father's new life. He was working part-time at a pharmacy, a humiliating step down for a former surgeon. He had sold his Mercedes and now drove a 10-year-old Toyota. The country club membership was gone. The friends who had once filled our house for lavish dinner parties had disappeared along with his status. In my darker moments, I savored these details, but they didn't bring the satisfaction I had expected. 3 months into this arrangement, my father began trying to contact me directly. First came emails, sent to my old college address that I rarely checked. "Olivia, I hope this reaches you. I've been reflecting on our past and recognize I made many mistakes as your father. Your mother's death was difficult for all of us, and I said unforgivable things. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to talk. Things have been challenging lately. I could use family support." I recognized the manipulative patterns immediately. The vague acknowledgement of mistakes without taking specific responsibility, the appeal to family loyalty, the subtle guilt trip. I didn't respond. Next came voicemails on my old number, which I maintained but rarely used. "Olivia, it's your father. Caroline mentioned you're doing well in real estate somewhere down south. I'm proud of you for making your own way. I'm having some financial difficulties after losing my position. Nothing you need to worry about, but if you wanted to reconnect, now might be a good time. Proud of me now that he needed something," and Caroline, who had stood silently by during years of his abuse, had been keeping tabs on me. I blocked his number. Through my property management company, I learned that my father had begun selling off household items to make rent. This piqued my interest. Those items had belonged to my mother, too. Using my business travel as cover, I flew to Connecticut and rented a car to drive past the house. From the outside, it looked neglected but still fundamentally the same. The Japanese maple my mother had loved was overgrown. The flower beds she had tenderly maintained were now just patches of weeds. While in town, I met with Trevor for coffee, ostensibly to discuss the property, but really to gather more information about my father. "He's been selling a lot of the household furnishings," Trevor confirmed. Mentioned something about downsizing, but it seems more desperate than planned. "The neighbors have complained about people coming at all hours to pick up furniture he's selling online." I thought of my mother's antique writing desk, her collection of first-edition novels, the hand-painted china that had been in her family for generations. Were those gone too? That evening, I checked social media for the first time in years and found Caroline's perfectly curated Instagram account. There she was, in her Boston penthouse, entertaining friends on the mahogany dining table that had been our mother's pride and joy. In another photo, she wore Mom's pearl necklace, the one Mom had specifically promised would be mine someday. The betrayal felt fresh again. Caroline had taken physical pieces of our mother while I had been left with nothing but memories. I increased the rent by $300 per month, still within market rate, but enough to tighten the screws. Through Trevor, my father pleaded for reconsideration, citing his financial hardship. I refused. This calculated pressure should have brought satisfaction, but instead, it left me feeling hollow. Was I becoming like him? Someone who used power to make others feel small. Then came the incident that changed everything. Trevor called me on a Sunday morning, his voice tense. "There's been an issue at the property. The tenant had some kind of episode last night. The neighbors called the police about shouting and breaking glass. When I went to inspect this morning, there's significant damage to the interior, broken mirrors, holes punched in walls, the banister ripped from the staircase. My father had apparently been drinking heavily and had a rage-fueled meltdown. The police report mentioned he'd been shouting about ungrateful children and sacrificing everything for nothing. The damage gave me legitimate grounds for eviction if I chose to pursue it, but it also gave me pause. My father, the once dignified surgeon who valued control above all else, had spiraled into the kind of chaos he had always despised in others. I was still processing this information when Trevor's next words stopped me cold. The tenant has been taken to Mercy Hospital. Apparently, he collapsed this morning from what the paramedics suspected was a heart attack. The neighbor who has his emergency contact info has been trying to reach someone named Caroline, but hasn't been successful. My father was in the hospital. The man I had been systematically pressuring, whose downfall I had been orchestrating from afar, might be dying. Did I feel guilty, concerned, vindicated? In that moment, I felt nothing but a strange sense that the universe was pulling me back to Connecticut. Back to confront the past I'd been manipulating from a safe distance. I need to do a full assessment of the damage, I told Trevor. I'll fly in tomorrow. After 8 years of exile, I was going home. Not to reconcile, but to face whatever truth awaited me there. I checked into a hotel near the hospital under my married name, Olivia Benet, a fiction created for this purpose. The anonymity felt necessary, like armor against the hometown that had witnessed my humiliation. My first stop was the house. Trevor met me there with the property assessment forms and a concerned expression. The tenant's personal belongings are still here, he said as he unlocked the front door. Legally, we need to wait for him to recover, or for family to collect them before we can do anything. Stepping into my childhood home was like walking into a time capsule that had decayed. The layout was the same, but everything felt smaller, shabbier. Water stains marred the ceiling. The hardwood floors my mother had refinished by hand were scratched and dull. Evidence of my father's rage was everywhere. Shattered picture frames, broken lamps, the splintered banister. But it was the emptiness that struck me most. Spaces where furniture should have been gaped like missing teeth. I'll need some time alone to document everything, I told Trevor. He hesitated, then handed me the keys. Call if you need anything. Take as long as you want. Once alone, I moved through the house like a ghost. My father's bedroom, once a shared space with my mother, was now a bachelor's den with unwashed clothes piled on a single unmade bed. Empty bourbon bottles lined the dresser where my mother's perfumes had once stood. I climbed the stairs to my old bedroom, half expecting to find it converted to storage or an office. Instead, it remained frozen in time. My high school memorabilia, still on the walls, my bookshelf intact, even my old stuffed bear sitting on the bed. Unlike the rest of the house, this room seemed preserved, untouched for 8 years. Caroline's room, by contrast, had been stripped bare. I continued my exploration, finding the kitchen cabinets nearly empty, the refrigerator containing only condiments and beer. My father had been living like a squatter in his own home. The basement was my last stop, a place I had rarely ventured. As a child because of its darkness and my father's insistence that his home office there was off, the damage hadn't extended to this level, but years of neglect had turned it damp and musty. My father's office door was ajar. Inside, cardboard boxes were stacked against the walls. Curious, I opened one and found it filled with papers. Old tax returns, insurance policies, bank statements. Another contained photo albums I had never seen before. As I pulled out the albums, a manila envelope fell to the floor, spilling its contents: medical bills, legal documents, and a stack of letters, bound with a rubber band. The first letter I picked up was from my mother to a divorce attorney, dated 3 months before her cancer diagnosis. My heart pounding, I read her words: "After 26 years of emotional abuse, I am finally ready to leave my husband." The attached financial records show his systematic control of our assets, including his unauthorized withdrawals from my personal inheritance accounts. I sat on the dusty floor, surrounded by revelations. Letter after letter documented my mother's secret plan to divorce my father, her discovery of his financial misconduct, and her fear of his reaction. The cancer diagnosis had derailed everything. She had chosen to endure the marriage rather than fight a legal battle while fighting for her life. Bank statements confirmed what the letters suggested. For years, my father had been siphoning money from accounts in my mother's name, her inheritance from her parents, meant to be passed to Caroline and me. He had forged her signature on transfers, systematically draining accounts she rarely checked. But the most damning evidence came in the form of my mother's journal. Hidden in a box marked Tax Records 1997, a place my father would never look, the entries spanned the last year of her life. Richard was furious that I've left money specifically to Olivia in my will, she wrote 3 months before her death. He doesn't know about the safety deposit box or the letters I've left with Rebecca. If anything happens to me, at least Olivia will eventually know the truth. Rebecca, my mother's sister, my aunt, whom I hadn't spoken to since the funeral. Deeper in the boxers, I found photographs I had never seen. My father with a blonde woman at a restaurant, at a hotel, looking intimate. The dates on the back corresponded with my mother's chemotherapy treatments. He had been having an affair while my mother was dying. The final piece of the puzzle was an amended will, clearly executed while my mother was heavily medicated, that removed several valuable assets that had been specifically designated for me. My father's signature was on it as a witness, along with his colleague, Dr. James Foster. Hours passed as I pieced together the extent of my father's betrayal. It wasn't just the emotional abuse I had endured. He had systematically stolen from my mother, manipulated her will during her most vulnerable time, carried on an affair during her illness, and then used her death to cut me out completely. The man in the hospital wasn't just my abusive father. He was a criminal who had stolen my inheritance and my mother's dignity in her final days. As darkness fell, I carefully repacked the evidence into a separate box that I could take with me. The righteous anger I had nursed for years was now substantiated by concrete proof. This wasn't about petty revenge anymore. It was about justice for my mother. My phone rang, startling me. Unknown number. Hello, is this Olivia? The voice was familiar but older, more tentative. Who's asking? I replied cautiously. It's Carolyn, your sister. The hospital called me about Dad. How did they get your number as an emergency contact? I hadn't given the hospital my number. Then I realized Trevor must have listed me as the property owner. Contact. I'm in town. On business, I said vaguely. How is he? Caroline sighed. Stable, not a heart attack, just severe arrhythmia brought on by excessive drinking and stress. They're keeping him overnight. I'm flying in tomorrow. A pause. Will you be there? 8 years of silence stretched between us. Yes, I said finally. I think it's time we all had a conversation. Olivia, whatever you're planning, I'll see you at the hospital. I hung up and looked around the basement room once more. The evidence I had gathered would change everything. The question was, after learning the full extent of my father's deception, did I still want revenge, or something else entirely? Mercy Hospital smelled the same as every medical facility I'd spent time in during my mother's illness, antiseptic, with undertones of cafeteria food and despair. I stood outside room 327, steeling myself for the first sight of my father in 8 years. I had dressed carefully that morning, a tailored charcoal suit, subtle makeup, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. The successful businesswoman, not the broken daughter. The box of evidence waited in my rental car. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door. Richard Caldwell had aged 2 decades in 8 years. His once commanding presence had shriveled along with his physique. Thin white hair replaced the thick dark waves I remembered. His skin hung loosely on his frame, yellowed from liver strain. The monitors beside him beeped steadily, the only sound in the room besides his raspy breathing. His eyes were closed. For a moment, I simply watched him. This stranger who had shaped so much of my life through his cruelty. He looked pathetic, diminished, nothing like the giant who had loomed over my childhood. As if sensing my presence, his eyes fluttered open. Confusion crossed his face, then recognition dawned slowly. Olivia. His voice was barely a whisper. Is that really you? I moved closer but remained out of reach. Hello, Richard. You called me Dad before. He attempted to sit up, wincing with the effort. That was before, I said simply. He fell back against the pillows, his eyes never leaving my face. You look successful. I am successful, I confirmed. No thanks to you. His expression shifted, calculation replacing surprise. I recognized the look. He was assessing the situation, determining how to play it to his advantage. It was the same expression he'd worn when negotiating with contractors or colleagues. I've made mistakes, Olivia, terrible mistakes. His voice strengthened, taking on the practiced sincerity he had used with difficult patients. Losing your mother broke something in me. The things I said at the funeral, I've regretted them every day since. Have you? I kept my tone neutral. Or do you regret that I walked away and wasn't available to help when you needed it? He flinched slightly. That's not fair. I was grieving, so was I replied. But grief doesn't make you cruel, unless cruelty was already there. A nurse entered to check his vitals, giving us both a moment to regroup. When she left, my father tried a different approach. You've done well for yourself, real estate. Caroline mentioned your own company. I nodded, offering no details. I'm proud of you, he said, reaching for my hand. I stepped back. I always knew you had potential. The audacity of his revision of history almost made me laugh. No, you didn't. You called me worthless my entire life, a failure, a disappointment. That was tough love, he insisted. I pushed you because I saw what you could become. Don't. My voice was sharp. Don't rewrite history. We both know what you really thought of me. His face hardened slightly, the mask of contrition slipping. Why are you here, Olivia? To remind me what a terrible father I was while I'm lying in a hospital bed. Is that what you came back for? Before I could answer, the door opened again. Caroline stood in the doorway, a designer handbag hanging from her elbow, perfectly highlighted, hair framing her face. She had aged too, but carefully, expensively. Olivia, she said, her tone cautious. You actually came. She turned to our father. Daddy, how are you feeling? The transformation in my father was immediate. His face softened, his posture straightened as much as his weakened state allowed. Better now that both my girls are here. Caroline gave him a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes, then turned to me. Can we talk outside? In the hallway, Caroline maintained a careful distance. I didn't think you'd actually show up. It's been 8 years, Olivia. No calls, no emails, not even a Christmas card. You didn't reach out either, I pointed out. After how you left. You made it clear you wanted nothing to do with any of us. She crossed her arms. And now you suddenly appear when Dad's in the hospital. Why? I studied my sister, the person who had witnessed my father's abuse firsthand for years and had chosen the path of least resistance. I have information about Dad that changes everything. About Mom's will, her inheritance, what he did while she was sick. Caroline's expression flickered. What are you talking about? Did you know Mom was planning to divorce him before she got sick? That he stole money from her accounts for years? That he was having an affair while she was in chemotherapy? My sister's face paled, but her denial was immediate. That's ridiculous. You're making things up to justify abandoning the family. I have proof, I said. Letters, bank statements, photos, and I think you already knew about the affair. Caroline glanced around nervously, lowering her voice. You need to stop this, Olivia. Dad's sick. He's lost everything. What good does dredging up the past do now? This isn't about punishment anymore, I insisted. It's about the truth. About what he took from Mom. From me. What about what you took from me? Caroline hissed suddenly. I had to deal with him alone after you left. Every holiday, every crisis, every drunken meltdown. You escaped while I became his caretaker. An emotional punching bag. This was a perspective I hadn't considered, that my leaving had shifted the burden entirely to Caroline. But then I remembered her Instagram posts with my mother's possessions. Is that why you took Mom's things? As compensation for dealing with him, she had the grace to look ashamed. He was going to sell everything. At least I preserved what mattered. Those things mattered to me too, Carolyn. The pearls were supposed to be mine. Mom promised. You weren't here, she said simply. And promises to the dead don't pay bills. We stood in tense silence until a doctor approached, clipboard in hand. Family of Richard Caldwell. I have his test results back. In the room, the doctor explained that my father's condition, while serious, was manageable with medication and lifestyle changes. Primarily, he needed to stop drinking and reduce stress. Is there someone who can help monitor his recovery at home? The doctor asked. Caroline and I exchanged glances. I live in Boston, Caroline said. I can't relocate, and I live in Texas, I added. My father, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the doctor's explanation, suddenly spoke up. Olivia, you work in real estate. You can work from anywhere. You could move back home for a while. The calculated manipulation was so transparent it was almost comical. The doctor, sensing tension, excused himself, promising to return with discharge papers. As soon as the door closed, I turned to my father. I'm not moving back. And this isn't my home anymore. Then why are you here? He demanded, his frail patient act evaporating. To watch me suffer? Is that what you want? I want the truth, I said evenly. About Mom's will. About her inheritance accounts. About the blonde woman you were seeing while Mom was dying. The color drained from his face. Caroline gasped softly beside me. You've been going through my private things. He accused. Break into my house. Not breaking in, I corrected. I have a key. I own the house. Sunrise Investments, LLC, that's me. I bought the house when it went into foreclosure. I've been your landlord for the past 5 months. Both of them stared at me, uncomprehending. My father's shock quickly transformed into outrage. You've been toying with me. Setting the rent just high enough to bleed me dry. Was this your plan, all along? Some sick revenge fantasy. Originally, yes, I admitted, but then I found Mom's letters. Her journal. The real will. Before you had her sign the amended version while she was on morphine. Caroline turned to our father. Dad, what is she talking about? He ignored her, his eyes locked on mine with familiar contempt. You always were a spiteful, ungrateful child. I gave you everything: education, opportunities, a good home, and this is how you repay me. By buying my house out from under me, and making accusations. Did you steal from Mom's inheritance accounts? I pressed. Did you forge her signature on transfers? Did you manipulate her will while she was too sick to understand what she was signing? I protected our family assets, he shot back. Your mother was naive about finances. She would have squandered that money on charities and art projects. It was her money to squander, I said quietly. And part of it was meant for me. He laughed bitterly. What would you have done with it back then? You had no direction, no ambition. I was trying to protect you from yourself. Caroline stepped between us. Stop it, both of you. This isn't helping anything. But my father wasn't finished. Years of resentment poured out of him, his hospital gown and IV drip doing nothing to diminish the venom in his words. You want to know the truth, Olivia? I never wanted a second child. Your mother got pregnant with you after we had agreed Caroline was enough. You were a mistake that trapped me in a marriage that was already failing. The words hit like physical blows, but I stood my ground. That doesn't justify emotional abuse, or theft, or adultery. Dad, Caroline interjected, clearly shocked. You don't mean that. It's the medication talking. He ignored her, his focus entirely on me. You think you've won? Taking my house. Digging up the past. I'm still your father. I'll fight this. I'll expose your little revenge scheme. You can try, I said calmly, but the evidence I found ... that would interest the probate court and possibly the district attorney. Caroline grabbed my arm. Olivia, please. He's sick. This stress could kill him. He brought this on himself, I replied, but my conviction wavered at the genuine fear in my sister's eyes. My father, sensing the shift, clutched his chest dramatically and began breathing heavily. The monitors beside him beeped more rapidly. Nurse, Caroline called, rushing to the door as medical staff hurried in. I stepped back, watching the familiar scene unfold. My father at the center of attention, Carolyn playing the devoted daughter, and me cast as the villain who had upset the delicate balance. But this time, I understood the dynamic for what it was: manipulation. My father was using his health crisis to regain control of the situation, to position himself as the victim rather than the perpetrator. In the hallway, Caroline confronted me. Are you happy now? You could have killed him. He's faking, I said with certainty. The doctor just gave him a clean cardiac report. This is what he always does when cornered. Creates a crisis to avoid accountability. Caroline stared at me, recognition slowly dawning in her eyes. How did we end up here? She whispered. When did everything get so broken? It was always broken, I replied softly. We just didn't have the words for it until now. As nurses stabilized our father's episode, I made a decision. This confrontation had confirmed what I needed to know. My father felt no genuine remorse, only regret at being caught and losing control. The truth about my mother's final wishes and her stolen inheritance was even worse than I had imagined. Revenge no longer seemed adequate. What I needed now was justice. Not just for me, but for my mother. I'm going to make this right, I told Caroline. Not for him. For Mom. For what should have been. She looked torn between her lifetime role as our father's defender and the uncomfortable truth she could no longer ignore. What are you going to do? she asked. What mom would have wanted, I answered. It's time to execute her real final wishes. Back at my hotel, I laid out the documents I had recovered from the basement in chronological order. The story they told was clear. My mother had planned to leave my father months before her cancer diagnosis, had documented his financial abuse, and had taken steps to protect assets for Caroline and me. The next morning, I called Jessica Morales, my attorney in Austin. I need a probate litigation specialist in Connecticut, I explained, then detailed what I had discovered. This is serious, Olivia, Jessica said after I finished. Financial fraud, will tampering, possible elder abuse. Given your mother's condition when the amended will was signed, the statute of limitations may have expired on some aspects, but not all. She connected me with Ilalonia Whitman, a formidable probate attorney in Hartford who agreed to meet me that afternoon. Elena's office was lined with law books and framed diplomas. She examined each document methodically, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification. Your mother was very thorough, she commented, reviewing the journal entries. These dated entries establishing her mental state and intentions before the illness will be crucial. Can we prove he manipulated her will while she was heavily medicated? I asked. Possibly. The amended will was witnessed by his colleague, which raises red flags about undue influence. The timeline works in our favor. This was signed 3 weeks before her death, when hospital records would show she was on high doses of pain medication. What about the money he took from her accounts? Elanina frowned. That's trickier given the time that's passed, but combined with everything else it establishes a pattern of financial exploitation. She outlined my options. Pursue criminal charges for fraud and financial exploitation. File a civil suit to recover misappropriated assets. Or challenge the probate process that had occurred after my mother's death. Or all 3, she added. But I should warn you, this will be public, messy, and your father will fight viciously. I'm counting on it, I replied. I left Ilalonina's office with a strategy and a timeline. She would begin preparing the legal challenge while I gathered additional evidence and statements. My next stop was unexpected, even to me. I found myself driving to a modest house in a neighboring town where my mother's sister, Rebecca, had lived for decades. Aunt Rebecca answered the door herself, her resemblance to my mother striking enough to make my breath catch. Olivia, she whispered, my God, is that really you? Before I could answer, she pulled me into a tight embrace. We thought we'd lost you forever. Over tea in her small living room, I explained what had brought me back to Connecticut. Rebecca listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly somber. I knew something wasn't right, she said when I finished. Martha called me about 2 months before her diagnosis, asking about financial advisors and divorce attorneys. She was afraid, Olivia, afraid of what Richard would do if he discovered she was planning to leave. Did you know about the safety deposit box she mentioned in her journal? I asked. Rebecca nodded slowly. I took her to the bank. She left something there for you. Said it was insurance in case anything happened to her. After the funeral, I tried to tell you, but Richard kept everyone away from you, and then you disappeared the next day. Rebecca accompanied me to Connecticut First Bank. With her as a witness named on the account, we were able to access my mother's safety deposit box. Inside was another journal, more detailed than the one I had found, documenting years of emotional and financial abuse. There were also original copies of financial records showing transfers from her accounts to unknown destinations, and a letter, addressed to me. With trembling hands, I opened it. My dearest Olivia, it began. If you're reading this, I wasn't strong enough to leave him while I was alive. I'm so sorry for staying, for allowing him to treat you the way he did. I told myself I was protecting you, but I was really protecting myself from facing the truth. That I chose the wrong man and lacked the courage to fix that mistake until it was almost too late. The enclosed documents prove what he's done with my inheritance money that should go to you and Caroline. I've left $50,000 in a separate account for you that he doesn't know about. It's not much, but it might help you start over somewhere new, if that's what you need. Most importantly, know that you were never a failure or a disappointment. You were my greatest joy, my most beautiful creation. Your sensitivity, your creativity, your enormous heart, these are strengths, not weaknesses, no matter what your father says. I love you infinitely, Mom. I couldn't stop the tears that followed. Rebecca held me as I cried for the mother who had tried to protect me even as she faced her own mortality. For the years of trauma we had both endured, for the relationship we should have had without my father's toxic influence. Armed with this additional evidence, I returned to Elena's office. We have an extremely strong case, she confirmed. Your mother's documented intentions, the suspicious timing of the amended will, the financial records, ... It's compelling. So what's next? I asked. We filed the petition to reopen the probate case, submit our evidence, and prepare for your father's response. But, Olivia, I want you to be clear on what victory looks like here. What do you actually want from this process? It was a question I had been asking myself since discovering the extent of my father's betrayal. Revenge had evolved into something more complex, a reckoning, a restoration, a rebalancing of what should have been. I want what my mother intended, her assets returned to Caroline and me. I want acknowledgement of what he did, and I want him to face consequences. Real ones, not just financial. Eleanina nodded. Then that's what we'll pursue. That evening, Caroline called, her voice tight with anxiety. Dad's being discharged tomorrow. He keeps asking where you're staying, what you're planning. He's called his attorney. I expected that, I replied. Caroline, there's something you need to see before this goes any further. Can you meet me tomorrow? She hesitated. Are you going to show me more awful things about Dad? Because I'm not sure I can handle that right now. It's about Mom, I said. About what she wanted for both of us. The next day, I showed Caroline everything. The journals, the financial records, the letter, and the contents of the safety deposit box. Her shock gradually transformed into grief, then anger. He lied to me about everything, she whispered. Told me Mom changed her will because she was angry at you for not visiting enough during her illness. That the money he took was with her permission for investment purposes. He manipulated both of us. Different tactics, same goal, control. I said. You were as trapped as I was, just in a different way. She didn't commit to supporting my legal action, but she didn't oppose it either. It was a start. The next step was the most direct, confronting my father with the evidence and giving him one chance to make things right, voluntarily before the legal machinery engaged. I arranged to meet him at the house's home, my property. Trevor escorted him back from the hospital and then discreetly left us alone. My father sat in what remained of the living room, looking diminished in the space that had once been his domain. I placed the box of evidence on the coffee table between us. I know everything, I began without preamble. About the money you took from Mom's accounts. About how you manipulated her will while she was medicated. About the affair during her chemotherapy. All of it. He stared at the box, his expression unreadable. I've consulted with attorneys, I continued. They believe we have an extremely strong case for fraud, financial exploitation, and invalidation of the amended will. So this is your revenge, he said flatly, dragging an old man through court, airing family business in public. This isn't about revenge anymore, I corrected him. It's about justice for Mom. About honoring what she actually wanted. What do you want, Olivia? He asked, suddenly sounding tired. Money, the house, public humiliation. I want you to admit what you did, to apologize genuinely for the abuse, the theft, the betrayal. To make restitution, and then I want you to disappear from my life for good. His laugh was bitter. You want a full confession and financial surrender. Why would I do that? Because, if you don't, I'll pursue this through every legal channel available. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who Dr. Richard Caldwell really is. The hospital board, your remaining colleagues, your friends. Everyone. You wouldn't, he challenged. I slid my mother's journal across the table. Read the entry from March 15th, then tell me what I wouldn't do. He opened the journal reluctantly, found the date, and began reading. His face paled as he absorbed my mother's detailed account of his verbal abuse toward me, her plan to take me away from him, her knowledge of his affair. Martha never confronted me about any of this, he said finally, closing the journal. Because she got sick, I replied, and chose to protect us rather than fight you while she was dying. He was silent for a long moment, the calculation evident in his eyes. I could almost see him weighing options, considering angles, looking for leverage. What specifically do you want? He asked eventually. I laid out my terms. A signed confession of financial misconduct, return of all misappropriated assets with interest, the family heirlooms he had given to Caroline without my consent, and a legally binding agreement to stay out of my life permanently. In exchange, I won't pursue criminal charges, I concluded. You can keep whatever dignity you have left. And the house. He pressed. The house is mine. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. He looked around at the home he had lived in for 30 years, his expression a mixture of resentment and defeat. I need time to think, he said finally. You have 24 hours. I replied, standing to leave. After that, I filed the legal paperwork, and this becomes public. As I reached the door, his voice stopped me. You really are Martha's daughter, he said quietly. She had that same steel when cornered. It wasn't an apology or an admission, but something in his tone suggested the beginning of recognition, that I wasn't the weak, worthless failure he had always claimed, that perhaps in facing him this way, I had proved I was something else entirely. The next day would determine whether that recognition led to resolution or to war. The 24 hours I gave my father came and went with no response. On the morning of the deadline, I instructed Ila Lenina to file the legal paperwork challenging the probate of my mother's estate and initiating proceedings to recover misappropriated assets. By that afternoon, Trevor delivered the formal eviction notice to my father, 30 days to vacate the premises. I expected rage, threats, perhaps another manufactured health crisis. What I didn't expect was silence. 3 days passed with no word, from either my father or his attorney. Caroline called to report he wasn't answering her calls either. Concerned, despite myself, I asked Trevor to check on him. The house is empty, Trevor reported. Most of his personal items are gone. No note, no forwarding address. My father had fled, an admission of guilt more definitive than any confession. The question was, what had he taken with him and where had he gone? The answer to the first question came from Caroline, who arrived at my hotel room that evening, visibly upset. He emptied his bank accounts, she said without preamble. Maxed out his credit cards. His phone is disconnected. And he took Mom's jewelry, the pieces I kept for safekeeping. The betrayal stung Caroline more deeply than me. She had been the loyal daughter, the one who stayed, yet he had stolen from her, too, before disappearing. I'm sorry, I told her, meaning it. I never thought he'd run ... or steal from you. She sank onto the edge of the bed. I've been so blind all these years. Defending him. Making excuses. She looked up at me, eyes glistening. You were right. To leave I should have gone with you. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get from my proud sister. I accepted it with a nod. We'll find him, I assured her. People like Dad leave trails. The search began in earnest the next day. Elena filed emergency motions to freeze any remaining assets in my father's name. I hired a private investigator, with expertise in financial fraud. Caroline contacted my father's few remaining friends, former colleagues, even distant relatives. Meanwhile, word began spreading through the small community. The Caldwell family drama that had simmered beneath the surface for years was now bubbling over into public view. I encountered mixed reactions when recognized around town. Some people avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with the messy reality behind the perfect facade my father had maintained. Others expressed quiet support, former patients who had glimpsed his temper, neighbors who had heard the arguments, colleagues who had suspected his financial improprieties. One unexpected ally emerged, Dr. James Foster, my father's former colleague, who had witnessed the amended will. When contacted by Ila Lenina, he agreed to meet with us. I've regretted signing that document for 8 years, he admitted in Ila Lenina's office. Richard assured me Martha was lucid, that she had requested the changes herself. But she could barely focus her eyes, let alone comprehend legal language. Why didn't you say something then? I asked, trying to keep the accusation from my voice. Dr. Foster looked genuinely remorseful. Fear. Initially, Richard had power at the hospital, could have made my life difficult. Later, it was shame. By the time I realized the full extent of what had happened, months had passed, and I told myself, it was too late to come forward. His testimony strengthened our legal position enormously. Ila Lenina was confident that, even without my father's presence, we could successfully challenge the probate decision. A week into the search, the private investigator called with news. We've located your father's vehicle at a long-term parking facility near Boston Logan International Airport. Airport records confirm he boarded a flight to Cancun, Mexico, 4 days ago. Mexico, of course. No extradition for financial crimes. Caroline was devastated by the confirmation of his flight. He's really gone, just abandoned everything. His home, his career, his daughters. His whole life here. No, I corrected her. He abandoned the consequences. There's a difference. Though my father had escaped legal prosecution, the civil proceedings continued. Elilani not filed motions to have the amended will invalidated, based on Dr. Foster's testimony and the evidence of my mother's true intentions. 3 weeks after my father's disappearance, the probate judge ruled in our favor. My mother's original will was reinstated, with her assets to be divided equally between Caroline and me. The judge also granted a civil judgment against my father for the misappropriated funds, which could be collected if he ever returned to the United States. It was a legal victory, but a hollow one. The man who had caused so much pain had evaded true accountability. The money and assets we might recover couldn't erase the years of abuse or my mother's suffering. The day after the ruling, Trevor called with unexpected news. "There's been a development at the house," he said cryptically. "You should come see for yourself." I arrived to find a locksmith changing the locks on the front door. "Someone broke in," Trevor explained, leading me inside. "But nothing seems to be missing. In fact, something was left behind." In the study, on what had been my father's desk, sat a small safe. It wasn't the large wall safe that had always been in the house. This was newer, portable. "The police have already checked it for explosives or anything dangerous," Trevor assured me. "It's clean, but locked. They said since it's on your property, it's legally yours to open." The locksmith approached with his tools. "Want me to crack it open?" I nodded, a strange sense of foreboding washing over me. Inside the safe was a single envelope with my name written in my father's distinctive handwriting, and a velvet jewelry box. I opened the envelope first. "Olivia," it began. "By the time you read this, I'll be beyond your legal reach. I won't apologize for protecting my interests. A man has the right to self-preservation, but I'm not entirely without conscience. In this box are your mother's most valuable pieces: the sapphire necklace her grandmother gave her, the diamond earrings from our 20th anniversary, and her engagement ring. Caroline has copies, not the originals. Martha always intended these for you. I won't say I was a good father or husband, we both know that would be a lie, but I recognize in you the same determination Martha had before I broke it. Don't let anyone break yours. Richard." It wasn't an apology or a confession. It was barely even an acknowledgement. But from a man like my father, it was something close to surrender. I opened the jewelry box with trembling hands. The pieces were exactly as described: the sapphire necklace I had admired as a child, the diamond earrings my father had given my mother at least one truth in his letter, and her platinum engagement ring with its modest center stone. I fastened the necklace around my throat, feeling its weight against my skin. My mother had worn this on special occasions, her slim fingers always touching it for reassurance when she was nervous. Now, it was mine, not through Caroline's gatekeeping or my father's manipulation, but through a strange, twisted form of justice. News of my father's flight spread quickly through the community. The story made the local paper, then regional news. Disgraced surgeon flees country amid fraud allegations. His carefully constructed reputation crumbled in his absence, the truth of his character finally exposed to public scrutiny. Former colleagues came forward with stories of ethical breaches they had witnessed, but never reported. The hospital launched an internal investigation into his patient records, uncovering patterns of billing fraud and unnecessary procedures. The malpractice case that had cost him his license was reopened based on new evidence. In a final ironic twist, the patient's family in the malpractice case reached out to me. They had been fighting for justice for years, stymied by my father's connections and legal maneuvering. "We don't blame you for his actions," the victim's daughter told me over coffee. "But your courage in exposing him has given us hope that the truth will finally come out." I shared what evidence I could, connecting them with Ila Lanina to assist their case. It wouldn't bring back their loved one, just as my actions couldn't erase my childhood trauma or restore my mother, but it was something: acknowledgement, validation, a step toward healing. As the legal proceedings wound down and the media attention began to fade, I stood in my childhood home one last time before putting it on the market. Each room held memories, some painful, some precious. In my mother's garden, now overgrown, but still showing hints of her careful planning, I found unexpected peace. She had created beauty despite living with a man who valued only status and control. She had protected me as best she could within the constraints of her own fears and illness. Carolyn joined me that afternoon, both of us quiet as we contemplated the end of this chapter of our lives. Our relationship remained complicated, a work in progress. But the shared experience of confronting our father's betrayal had created a tentative bridge between us. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, referring not to the house sale, but to my plans for the money. I nodded. It's what Mom would have wanted. After paying off the remaining mortgage and covering the legal fees, I had divided the proceeds into 3 portions. 1/3 went to Caroline, acknowledging her own trauma and years of caregiving. 1/3 would establish the Martha Caldwell Scholarship for survivors of family abuse seeking education as a path to independence. And the final 1/3 would fund a domestic violence intervention program at the local hospital, where my mother had received her cancer treatment. "She would be proud of you," Carolyn said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I am." Coming from my perfect sister, the one who had always had our father's approval, those words meant more than I had expected. My father's legal proceedings continued in my absence. He had been released on bail pending trial, his passport confiscated, his movements restricted to the state. According to Caroline, who still communicated with him occasionally, he was a shadow of his former self, the powerful surgeon reduced to a disgraced defendant, relying on court-appointed counsel after his Mexican escape had drained his remaining resources. I had no desire to witness his downfall in person. My testimony had been recorded in depositions, my evidence catalogued and submitted. Whatever punishment the legal system determined was appropriate would proceed without my presence. I had already received the only form of justice that mattered to me, the truth exposed, my mother's wishes honored, my own life reclaimed. The day before leaving Connecticut, I visited my mother's grave for the first time since her funeral. The headstone was simple: Marta Ellen Caldwell, beloved mother, with her dates of birth and death. No mention of wife or my father, a small mercy I suspected Caroline had arranged. I laid a bouquet of her favorite flowers, purple irises, against the stone. "I found the truth, Mom," I said softly. "I made it right, as much as I could." The cemetery was quiet, just the rustle of autumn leaves and distant traffic. No dramatic moment of spiritual connection, no cinematic closure, just a daughter saying goodbye to her mother with more understanding than she'd had 8 years earlier. That evening, I met Aunt Rebecca for dinner at her home. She had become an unexpected ally and friend during these months of legal battles and emotional reckonings. "What will you do now?" she asked, as we shared the peach cobbler she had made for dessert. "My mother's recipe." "Go home to Austin," I replied. "Focus on my business. Maybe finally take that vacation Sarah's been telling me I need for years." Rebecca studied me thoughtfully. "And what about forgiveness? Have you found that yet?" It was a complex question. Had I forgiven my father, Caroline, myself? "I've let go of the anger," I said finally. It was consuming too much of me. But forgiveness feels like saying what happened was okay, and it wasn't. "Forgiveness isn't for them," she reminded me gently. "It's for you. It's releasing the hold they have on your heart." I considered this, then maybe I'm getting there. Slowly. The next morning, I boarded a plane back to Austin with my mother's jewelry in my carry-on and a lighter weight on my shoulders. The revenge I had initially sought had evolved into something more meaningful, a reckoning, a restoration, a reclaiming of both my mother's legacy and my own narrative. In Austin, life gradually resumed its rhythm. My business partners had kept everything running smoothly during my extended absence. My friends welcomed me back without pressing for details I wasn't ready to share. And Aiden, who had been a steadfast support through daily phone calls, waited at the airport with a simple sign: "Welcome home, warrior." 2 weeks after my return, I received an unexpected letter, forwarded through Elena's office. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the return address a correctional facility in Connecticut. My father had written to me from jail, where he was being held after violating the terms of his bail. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. The letter inside was brief, the handwriting shaky. "Olivia, the doctors say I don't have long. Heart failure. Ironically, I don't expect forgiveness and won't insult you by asking for it, but I want you to know one thing: you were never worthless. The failure was mine, not yours. Richard." No dad. No expressions of love. Just the closest thing to an apology he was capable of offering. I placed the letter in a drawer without responding. If it was true about his health, I felt neither joy nor sorrow, just a hollow acknowledgement that some cycles end not with dramatic confrontation but with quiet surrender. A month later, Caroline called to inform me our father had died in the prison infirmary. She asked if I would return for the funeral. "No," I said gently. That chapter is closed for me, but you should go if you need that closure. She understood. We were different in our needs and approaches to healing. But for the first time, we respected those differences rather than judging them. With my father's death, the criminal charges were dropped, but the civil judgments against his estate remained. What little he had left would go toward restitution for the malpractice victims and other financial obligations. Nothing would come to Caroline or me, which felt appropriate. The inheritance that mattered had already been reclaimed. As autumn turned to winter, I made a decision that surprised even me. Using part of my share from the house sale, I purchased a small commercial building in East Austin that had been sitting vacant for years. After renovation, it became the Martha Caldwell Center for Family Healing, a nonprofit offering support groups, counseling, and resources for survivors of family abuse. The first support group meeting was held in January. As I welcomed the small circle of nervous participants, mostly women with stories etched in their cautious smiles and watchful eyes, I felt my mother's presence more strongly than I had since her death. "My name is Olivia," I began, touching the sapphire necklace that had become a talisman, "and like many of you, I grew up believing I was worthless because someone who should have loved me said so. Today, we're going to talk about reclaiming our narratives." In that circle of strangers becoming allies, I shared the full story of my journey, not the sanitized version, but the messy, complicated truth. The initial desire for revenge that had evolved into a quest for justice. The pain of confronting family betrayal. The complex process of healing that wasn't linear or perfect. The most important thing I learned, I told them as our session concluded, is that other people's cruelty doesn't define your worth, and sometimes, the family that heals you isn't the one you were born into. After the meeting, I walked through the rooms of the center, the counseling offices with their comfortable chairs, the children's area with bright, hopeful colors, the resource library filled with books I wished had been available to my mother. This place wouldn't erase what had happened to any of us, but it might prevent the same patterns from repeating in new generations. Sarah visited from Austin the following month, inspecting the center with obvious pride. From that scared girl in a coffee shop to this, she marveled. Martha would be bursting with pride. "I hope so," I said. "Everything good in me came from her. And some things came just from you," Sarah corrected gently. "Your resilience, your determination, your capacity to transform pain into purpose. Don't give all the credit away." Caroline and I established a new tradition of monthly video calls. Not the forced performance of family closeness, but honest conversations between two women working to understand each other. She had started therapy herself, beginning the long process of untangling her own role in our family dynamic. "I always thought Dad's approval would fill the emptiness," she confessed during one call. "But it just made the hole bigger." "I know," I said simply. "I've been there." The house in Connecticut sold again a year later, this time to a family with 3 daughters. I happened to be in town for a fundraiser for the scholarship program and drove past out of curiosity. The new owners had painted the front door yellow, my mother's favorite color. The garden had been restored, irises blooming where my mother had once planted them. Life continued its forward momentum. My business expanded to include a division focused on creating affordable housing for domestic violence survivors transitioning to independence. Aiden and I moved beyond friendship to something deeper, building a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine support rather than the toxic patterns I had grown up witnessing. On the 5th anniversary of my confrontation with my father, I received a package from Carolyn. Inside was a photo album I had never seen before, pictures of our mother as a young woman before she met our father. Her smile was uninhibited, her posture confident and free. "Found this in a box of Aunt Rebecca's things after she passed," Caroline's note explained. "Thought you should have it. This is who Mom was before him. This is what she wanted for us." I traced my finger over my mother's young face, seeing in it reflections of both Caroline and myself. The woman who had given us life had contained multitude strength and vulnerability, courage and fear, wisdom and blind spots, just as I did, just as we all do. That night, I dreamed of my mother's garden in full bloom, the two of us working, side by side, in comfortable silence. When I woke, tears on my pillow, I understood that true closure isn't about perfect justice or even complete healing. It's about making peace with the imperfect reality of human relationships while refusing to let the past dictate the future. The Martha Caldwell Center expanded to 3 locations over the next few years. Each time we opened a new facility, I wore my mother's sapphire necklace and carried her journal, not as symbols of trauma, but as reminders of resilience. 10 years after I bought my childhood home to evict my father, I stood before a crowd at a fundraising gala for the center, preparing to share my story publicly for the first time. Many of you have asked why I created this center. I began. The answer begins with a house, a mother's love, and words that wounded deeply, but it doesn't end there. As I spoke, I saw heads nodding in recognition, eyes glistening with tears, faces set with determination. My personal story had become something larger, a testimony to the possibility of transformation, of turning family trauma into collective healing. The opposite of abuse isn't just safety, I concluded. It's wholeness. It's the freedom to define yourself on your own terms. It's building something beautiful from the broken pieces. Afterward, a young woman approached me, twisting her hands nervously. Your story, ... It's single quotes as like you've been living in my head, she said. My father says the same things to me. I thought I was the only one. You're not alone, I told her. And you never were. In that moment, I understood the full circle of my journey. The house I had purchased as an instrument of revenge had ultimately led to a place of genuine healing, not just for me, but for others walking similar paths. The worthless failure my father had named had become a woman of value and purpose. The revenge I had sought had transformed into restoration. And the mother whose protection I had longed for lived on through my work, her love extending now to others who needed it. I had sold the $830,000 house my father was living in and left him alone. But in doing so, I had found my way home to myself, to my mother's true legacy, and to the family of choice and community that now surrounded me. Some would call it karma. Others might see poetic justice, but I simply call it healing, imperfect, ongoing, and entirely worth the journey. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, you know how complicated family healing can be. It's rarely a straight line, and true justice often looks different than we initially imagine. Has my story resonated with any of your own family experiences? I'd be grateful if you'd share in the comments below. Every time we speak our truth, we help someone else find their voice. If this journey touched you, please like and subscribe to support more stories of healing and transformation. And consider sharing this with someone who might need to hear that their family history doesn't determine their future. Thank you for witnessing my story. In sharing it, I found another piece of my own healing, and I hope, perhaps, you found a piece of yours too.